A single father struggles to maintain harmony at home while helping his daughter overcome her insecurities. Everything changes when an intimate message, sent by mistake, reveals his vulnerability to an unlikely person. The response he receives breaks the silence and sparks an unexpected connection. Before listening to this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional tales. Mark adjusted the television volume as he watched Clara concentrating on her drawings at the living room table. The 7-year-old girl chewed on the tip of her colored pencil, trying to choose the perfect shade to paint the princess's hair she had drawn. It was a routine scene in their home in the countryside, but one that still brought that familiar tightness in his chest. The school had sent a circular about the science fair project last week, and Clara still hadn't chosen her theme. Mark knew he should help her, but he confessed to himself that science had never been his strong suit. As a physical education teacher, his expertise was on soccer fields and basketball courts, not in experiments with baking soda volcanoes. "Daddy, do you think Miss Agnes will like my drawing?" Clara held up the paper, showing the golden-haired princess she had created. Mark felt a lump in his throat as he realized the princess looked very much like the person who used to tell Clara bedtime stories almost 2 years ago. "I'm sure she'll love it, sweetie," Mark replied, affectionately ruffling his daughter's dark hair. "But shouldn't you be thinking about the science fair project? Remember the presentation is next week?" Clara made a face. "It's too hard, Daddy. I don't understand any of that stuff. Olivia in my class already chose to do carnivorous plants, and Peter is going to talk about planets. I don't know anything about any of that." Mark sat next to his daughter, pulling her into a hug. "Hey, you're very smart. I'm sure we'll find something interesting for you to present. How about we think about something related to the human body? I can help you with that." Clara's eyes lit up for a moment, but soon returned to showing insecurity. "Do you really think so, Daddy? But what if I forget everything when it's time to present? What if the others laugh at me?" Mark recognized that anxiety. Clara had always been a sensitive child, but in recent months she had developed a shyness that worried him. At school, the teachers commented that she isolated herself during recess and had difficulty participating in group activities. Mark wondered if it was his responsibility, if somehow he wasn't managing to meet all of his daughter's emotional needs. "No one will laugh at you, Clara, and if you forget something, that's okay. The important thing is to try, right?" Mark kissed the top of her head. "How about we have some dinner and then think about ideas for your project together?" While preparing a simple sandwich for dinner, Mark watched Clara through the kitchen window. She had returned to drawing, but now she made stronger, almost irritated strokes. He sighed, feeling the familiar weight of the responsibility of raising a child alone. There were moments when he felt completely lost, as if navigating unknown waters without a map. After dinner, father and daughter settled on the sofa with a science book Mark had borrowed from the school library. They flipped through pages about the solar system, the water cycle, and different types of animals. But Clara seemed distracted. Her eyes constantly drifted to the bookshelf where the family photos were kept. "Daddy," she suddenly said, interrupting the reading about photosynthesis, "do you think Mommy would be proud of me if I managed to do a cool project?" The question caught Mark off guard. They had established a tacit rule to talk about Clara's mother whenever she wanted, but lately those moments had become rarer. Mark always tried to be honest with his daughter, even when the questions were difficult to answer. "I'm absolutely sure she would be," Mark replied, pulling Clara closer. "She was always proud of you, sweetie. Remember how she clapped when you showed her your drawings?" Clara nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. "She always said I was an artist." "And you are," Mark confirmed. "Maybe we can think of a project that combines art and science. What do you think?" The idea seemed to cheer Clara up, and they spent a few more minutes discussing possibilities. When Mark finally put her to bed, it was already past 9 in the evening. He read a story, said the prayers Clara insisted on every night, and kissed her forehead before turning off the light. Back in the living room, Mark collapsed onto the sofa and picked up his phone to check the day's messages. There were a few messages in the school teachers group chat, an electricity bill reminder, and a dentist's appointment reminder for Clara next week. Nothing urgent, but the loneliness of the empty house always bothered him at those times. It was in these quiet moments that the longing hit hardest. Mark looked at the phone in his hands and, without thinking much, opened the conversation he kept with the old number. It was a habit he had developed in the first few months after Rose's passing, a way to cope with the need to share the small everyday moments. He started typing, letting his thoughts flow through the words. "Clara is worried about the science fair project. You always knew how to help her with these things. I feel lost sometimes. I miss you every day, but today was especially difficult. She asked if you would be proud of her, and I almost cried right then and there." Mark paused, rereading the message. He continued, "I don't know if I'm doing everything right, Rose. Sometimes I'm afraid she needs something I can't give. You were always better at these emotional things. I miss you. Sometimes it hurts so much I can't even breathe." Without a second thought, he pressed send. It was part of his routine, a way to process the feelings that accumulated during the day. Mark put the phone aside and went to the kitchen to prepare his evening tea, a chamomile blend that helped him relax before bed. It was when he was returning to the living room that he heard the sound of a notification on his phone. Mark frowned, finding it strange to receive a message so late. He picked up the device and his heart almost stopped when he saw there was a reply to the message he had just sent. "Are you okay? Do you want to talk?" Mark blinked several times, trying to process what he was seeing. He rechecked the number to which he had sent the message, and it was then that he realized his mistake. The number wasn't Rose's. In fact, upon a closer look at the contact, he realized he had sent the message to Agnes Miller, the academic coordinator at the school where he worked. A wave of panic washed over him. Agnes was known for her rigid and professional demeanor. She maintained a respectful distance from all teachers, always focused exclusively on academic matters. Mark had never seen her genuinely smile, and now he had sent her one of the most intimate and vulnerable messages he had ever written. His hands trembled as he began to type a desperate explanation, trying to minimize the embarrassment of the situation. But before he could formulate the right words, another message from Agnes appeared on the screen. "Mark, I realized it might have been a mistake, but your message worried me. If you need to talk, I'll be available. You don't need to explain if you don't feel comfortable." The response completely surprised him. There was no judgment in her words, nor the embarrassment he expected. Instead, there was something he didn't expect to find in Agnes Miller: genuine concern. Mark stared at his phone screen for several minutes, unsure how to respond. Part of him wanted to invent an excuse, pretend it had all been an unimportant misunderstanding. But there was something in the way Agnes had replied that made him hesitate. Finally, he typed, "It was a mistake, yes. I usually write messages to my wife's old number. It's a way of coping with, well, you can imagine. I apologize for bothering you so late." The reply came quickly. "You didn't bother me, and you don't need to apologize for missing someone. Rest well, Mark. We can talk more tomorrow if you like." Mark reread the message several times before replying with a simple "thank you" and putting his phone aside. He lay down that night with his mind buzzing with contradictory thoughts. There was something in Agnes's response that intrigued him, a kindness that completely contrasted with the image he had of her. As he tried to fall asleep, Mark found himself wondering if he truly knew the people he worked with every day. Agnes had always been a distant, almost intimidating figure, but her response revealed an empathy he hadn't expected to find. Perhaps there was more to her than what appeared on the rigid surface she presented to the world. Sleep was slow to come, and when it finally did, Mark dreamed of unexpected conversations and connections he had never imagined possible. Mark woke up the following Saturday to the sound of Clara watching cartoons in the living room. The morning sun streamed through the bedroom curtains, and for a moment he managed to forget the embarrassment of the previous night, until the memories rushed back like a wave, the message sent by mistake, Agnes's unexpectedly kind reply, the strange feeling of having been understood by someone he barely knew. He got up, stretched, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Clara was sitting on the living room floor, still in her pajamas, completely absorbed by the cartoons on television. It was a Saturday ritual they had established. Morning cartoons, then some chores, and if weather permitted, a walk in the park near their neighborhood. "Good morning, sweetie." Mark kissed the top of his daughter's head. "Have you brushed your teeth yet?" "Hi, Daddy." "Not yet, but I'm going to," Clara replied, without taking her eyes off the screen. "Can I have hot chocolate today, please?" Mark smiled. "Of course, but teeth first, okay?" While Clara ran to the bathroom, Mark turned on the stove to heat the milk. Saturdays always brought a different feeling to the house, more relaxed, warmer. It was when he could just be a father, without the pressure of work and school responsibilities. The sound of the doorbell surprised him. Mark frowned, checking the clock on the kitchen wall. It was only 8:30 in the morning, too early for visitors. Perhaps it was the postman with a delivery, or their neighbor, Mrs. Fiona, with a complaint about the television volume. But when he opened the door, Mark found Agnes Miller standing on the porch. She was wearing a light blue sweater and jeans, a completely different version of the woman always dressed in dark suits he knew from school. In her hands, she carried a thermal bag and 2 cups of coffee. "Good morning, Mark," Agnes said with a hesitant smile. "I hope you don't mind the visit. I brought coffee and some materials that might help Clara with her science fair project. If it's not a good time..." Mark was paralyzed for a few seconds, processing the situation. Agnes was there, at his doorstep, offering help in a way he would never have imagined possible. No, come in, please. Clara is having breakfast." Agnes entered the living room, and Mark noticed how she discreetly observed the environment. The house wasn't large, but it was cozy, decorated with Clara's drawings on the walls and family photos scattered on the bookshelves. There were toys organized in a corner and books stacked on the coffee table. "Daddy, who is it?" Clara appeared running from the hallway, stopping suddenly when she saw the visitor. She recognized Agnes immediately, and Mark noticed a mix of curiosity and shyness on his daughter's face. "Hello, Clara." Agnes knelt down to be at the girl's height. "I'm Miss Agnes, from your school's administration. Your father told me about the science fair project, and I brought some ideas that might interest you. Would you like to see them?" Mark watched the interaction with fascination. Agnes's voice had completely changed, becoming softer, warmer. It was as if she had removed a mask she wore at school, revealing a completely different person underneath. Clara nodded shyly, and Agnes opened the bag she had brought. From inside, she took out bottles with colored liquids, a small portable microscope, some plants in small pots, and a basic children's chemistry kit. "I brought hot chocolate too," Agnes said, taking a thermos out of the bag. "I thought you might like it." "Hot chocolate," Clara exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "Daddy was going to make some for me, but yours must be much better." Agnes laughed, and the sound surprised Mark. It was a genuine, spontaneous laugh, completely different from the polite smiles she offered at school. "I don't know if it's better, but it's made with care. How about we try it and decide together?" In the following minutes, Mark's kitchen transformed into a completely new environment. Agnes served hot chocolate in colorful mugs that Clara chose, while Mark prepared toast. The conversation flowed naturally, with Agnes asking about Clara's interests and the girl responding with growing enthusiasm. "I really like to draw," Clara said, showing some of her work to Agnes. "But science is very difficult. I don't understand how things work." "You know, Clara, science is all around us," Agnes explained, picking up one of the girl's drawings. "Look at this rainbow drawing you made. Did you know you can create a rainbow indoors?" "Really?" Clara asked. "Really, and it's super easy. We just need water, a small mirror, and sunlight." Agnes looked at Mark. "Do you have a mirror we can use?" Mark brought a hand mirror, and Agnes guided Clara in a simple experiment at the kitchen table. With a glass of water, the mirror positioned at a specific angle, and sunlight streaming through the window, they managed to project a small rainbow onto the wall. "I did it!" Clara shouted, clapping her hands. "Look, Daddy, I made a real rainbow." Mark felt an unexpected emotion seeing his daughter's joy. It had been weeks since he had seen Clara so excited about something related to school. Agnes had managed in a few minutes to awaken an interest in the girl that he hadn't been able to generate in days of trying. "This could be your science fair project," Agnes suggested. "We can explore how white light separates into different colors, and you can make drawings showing the process. It combines science with art, which is exactly your strength." "Can I make drawings to explain?" Clara asked, excited. "Of course. In fact, the best projects are those that combine different ways of learning. You can draw, do experiments, and even tell a story about light and colors." Mark watched the interaction between Agnes and Clara with growing admiration. Agnes wasn't just helping with the project, she was genuinely connecting with his daughter, finding a way to transform Clara's anxiety into enthusiasm. They spent the whole morning developing ideas for the project. Agnes had brought several materials and suggestions, but always allowing Clara to make her own choices and discoveries. She explained scientific concepts simply, using analogies that a 7-year-old could easily understand. During lunch, which naturally extended with Agnes staying to eat with them, the conversation deepened. Clara told stories about school, about her classmates, about the teachers she liked, and those who made her nervous. "Sometimes I'm scared to speak in front of the class," Clara admitted, stirring the pasta with sauce Mark had prepared. "What if I forget everything? What if the others laugh?" Agnes leaned forward, giving the girl's concern her full attention. "You know, Clara, everyone gets nervous sometimes, even adults. Do you want me to tell you a secret?" Clara nodded eagerly. "When I was little, about your age, I was also very scared to speak in front of people. One day at school I had to present a project about butterflies. I had studied so much, knew everything about the subject, but when it was my turn, I just froze." "What happened?" Clara asked, completely absorbed in the story. "I looked at the teacher, then at my classmates, and I couldn't say anything. Then I remembered something my mother had told me, that when we get nervous we can imagine we're telling the story to someone we love very much. So I imagined I was telling her about the butterflies, and the words started to come out naturally." Mark noticed a shadow pass over Agnes's face when she mentioned her mother, but she quickly smiled at Clara again. "And it worked?" Clara asked. "It worked perfectly. And you know what else? After that day, I discovered that I love teaching and talking about things that interest me. The fear didn't completely disappear, but I learned that it's normal to feel a little flutter in your stomach sometimes." "A flutter in my stomach," Clara repeated, amused by the expression. "That's exactly how I feel." "So, you know what it is. And on the day of your presentation, if you feel that little flutter, remember to imagine you're telling someone special about the rainbow, okay?" Clara nodded, looking more confident. Mark observed the dialogue with a mix of gratitude and surprise. Agnes had a natural ability to deal with children that he had never imagined. At school, she always seemed so distant, so focused on bureaucratic matters, that it was difficult to imagine this more human and accessible version. After lunch, Agnes helped Clara organize a timeline for the project, dividing the tasks into small, non-intimidating steps. They made a list of necessary materials, sketched the drawings Clara wanted to include, and even rehearsed a short presentation. When Agnes finally prepared to leave, it was already mid-afternoon. Clara ran to hug her, a spontaneous gesture that clearly took Agnes by surprise, but which she reciprocated with genuine affection. "Thank you for helping me with the project," Clara said. "Can I call you if I need help?" Agnes looked at Mark, who nodded discreetly. "Of course, sweetie, whenever you need to." Mark walked Agnes to the door, still processing everything that had happened that day. "Agnes, I don't know how to thank you. Clara hasn't shown so much enthusiasm for something from school in a long time. You don't need to thank me, Mark. She's a special girl, very intelligent and sensitive. She just needed someone to find the right way to awaken her confidence." They stood on the porch for a moment, a comfortable silence between them. Mark noticed that Agnes looked different not only in her behavior, but also in her posture. It was as if spending the day with them had relaxed something in her that was constantly tense. "Agnes," Mark finally said, "about last night. The message." "Mark," she gently interrupted him, "we all have ways of dealing with the absence of important people. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I was touched that you shared something so personal, even if it was by accident." There was something in her eyes at that moment, an understanding that went beyond the immediate situation. Mark had the impression that Agnes spoke from her own experience, as if she too intimately knew the weight of loneliness and longing. "Well," Agnes said, returning to a lighter tone, "I hope Clara feels more confident now. And if you need anything for the project, don't hesitate to reach out to me." Mark watched her walk away down the street, with more relaxed steps than he usually saw in the school corridors. When he closed the door and returned to the living room, he found Clara already organizing her art supplies to start the project drawings. "Daddy," she said without lifting her eyes from the paper. "I like Miss Agnes. She's nice, isn't she?" "She is, sweetie," Mark replied, still thinking about the transformation he had witnessed that day. "Very nice." The following week brought a subtle but noticeable change in the school's dynamic. Mark noticed that Agnes greeted him differently in the hallways, with a warmer nod and a smile that seemed genuine. It wasn't anything obvious, nothing that would draw the attention of other teachers, but there was a silent connection between them that hadn't existed before. Clara, in turn, dove headfirst into the science fair project. Every evening, after dinner, she dedicated herself to the drawings and experiments Agnes had suggested. Mark watched with renewed joy as his daughter had regained enthusiasm for school and, especially, confidence in herself. On Thursday, during the break between physical education classes, Mark received a message from Agnes. "How's Clara's project coming along? If you like, I can drop by this weekend to check on the progress." Mark hesitated before replying. Agnes's visit the previous Saturday had been unexpected but natural. Inviting her again felt like a deliberate step towards something he wasn't quite sure how to define. But thinking of Clara and how much Agnes's presence had helped his daughter, he typed, "Clara would be very happy. How about Sunday? I can prepare lunch." The reply came quickly. "I'd love that. Can I bring dessert?" On Sunday, Mark woke up earlier than usual, with a different energy coursing through his veins. There was something stimulating about the prospect of receiving Agnes again, of seeing Clara interact with her, of sharing a domestic moment with someone other than his daughter. It had been a long time since he felt such anticipation for a visit. Clara woke up shortly after, already asking if Agnes was arriving. "She said she was bringing dessert. Do you think it'll be cake or pie or pudding?" "I don't know, sweetie, but I'm sure it'll be delicious," Mark replied, smiling at his daughter's excitement. "How about you show her all the drawings you made this week?" Clara ran to her room to get her folder of work, and Mark took the opportunity to check on the lunch he was preparing. He had decided to make something special, a saffron chicken risotto he had learned to make by watching videos online, accompanied by a colorful salad and homemade bread. When Agnes arrived, promptly at noon, Clara opened the door before Mark could even leave the kitchen. "Miss Agnes, look how many drawings I made, and I already know how to explain everything about light and colors." Agnes entered carrying a cardboard box and a radiant smile. "That's wonderful, Clara. I can't wait to see everything. And I brought an apple pie I baked last night." "Apple pie!" Clara clapped her hands. "It's my favorite dessert." Mark appeared, drying his hands on a dish towel, and immediately noticed how Agnes seemed more relaxed than the previous week. She was wearing a simple blue cotton dress and had let down her hair, which at school she always wore tied in a rigid bun. "I hope you don't mind the smell of saffron," Mark said, gesturing towards the kitchen. "I decided to try something new today." "I love saffron," Agnes replied, discreetly inhaling the aroma coming from the kitchen. "My mother used to make a similar risotto when I was little. The smell brings back good memories." It was the second time Agnes had mentioned her mother, and Mark noticed a soft melancholy in her voice when she spoke of her. But before he could reflect further on it, Clara was already pulling Agnes to the living room table, eager to show all her work. "Look, Miss Agnes, I made this drawing showing how light enters a prism and separates into colors, and here I drew the rainbow experiment we did. And this one shows why the sky is blue." Agnes examined each drawing with genuine attention, asking questions that showed she was truly interested in Clara's work. Mark watched from a distance, impressed by the patience and care Agnes dedicated to his daughter. "Clara, these drawings are fantastic. You've really understood the concepts, and your way of explaining through art is brilliant." Agnes looked at Mark. She has a special talent for transforming complex ideas into something visual and understandable. During lunch, the conversation flowed naturally among the three. Clara talked about her week at school, about her classmates who were excited about their own projects, and about how she felt more confident for the presentation. "You know, Miss Agnes," Clara said while eating the risotto, "I was thinking about what you said about imagining I'm telling the story to someone special. Can I imagine I'm telling it to you and Daddy?" Agnes smiled, touched by the innocence of the question. "Of course you can, dear. It will be an honor to be in your imagination during the presentation." Mark noticed how Agnes's eyes lit up at Clara's response, and he felt a strange emotion in his chest. There was something deeply touching in the way Agnes interacted with his daughter, as if she understood exactly what Clara needed. After lunch, while Clara played in the small garden they had in the back of the house, Mark and Agnes stayed on the porch drinking coffee. It was a more intimate moment without the girls' lively presence to fill the silences. "Agnes," Mark said, watching Clara play with the flowers, "can I ask you something personal?" She looked at him with curiosity. "Of course. You have a natural ability with children that impresses me. It's as if you know exactly what to say, how to connect. But at school you always seemed, well, more distant. Why?" Agnes was silent for a few moments, stirring her coffee with the spoon. "I think I built an armor over the years," she finally said. "At work I feel like I need to be seen as serious, competent someone who maintains control. It's easier to keep a distance than to expose myself. And outside of work?" Agnes smiled with a gentle sadness. "Outside of work, I didn't have much to connect with. My life has been reduced to the professional for a long time." Mark realized there was a deeper story there, but he didn't want to press. Instead, he said, "Clara brought something different out in you, didn't she?" "She did," Agnes admitted, watching the girl who was now chasing a butterfly among the plants. "She reminds me of myself when I was a child. Intelligent, sensitive, but afraid to show it to the world." "Did you lose your mother very young?" Mark asked gently, remembering her previous mentions. Agnes nodded, a shadow crossing her face. "I was 8 years old. It was difficult. My father didn't know how to deal with a little girl and his own grief at the same time. I ended up learning to be very independent, very closed off." Mark felt a wave of compassion for her. "I imagine that was very difficult." "It was. And for a long time I kept people at a distance because it was easier, until—" She hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Until I got married and thought I had found someone with whom I could be myself. But that also didn't last." There was a deep pain in Agnes's voice, and Mark understood that she was sharing something very personal with him. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "Actually, it feels good to talk," Agnes said, surprised by her own honesty. "It's been a long time since I've talked about these things with anyone." Clara came running back, interrupting the intimate moment, but not uncomfortably. She brought some small flowers she had picked. "Look, Miss Agnes, these are for you." Agnes received the flowers with a genuine smile, clearly touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Clara. They are beautiful. Can I show you my room? I have more drawings there." Agnes looked at Mark, who nodded. "Of course, I'd love to see it." While Clara guided Agnes through the house, Mark stayed on the porch, reflecting on the conversation they had had. There were layers to Agnes he was only just beginning to discover, an emotional complexity that explained both her professional rigidity and the kindness she showed in private moments. When they returned, Clara was even more excited. "Daddy, Miss Agnes said I can call her if I get nervous before the presentation, and she's going to be there watching." "I'll be cheering for you," Agnes said to Clara. "I'm sure you'll do wonderfully." The afternoon passed quickly, with Agnes helping Clara rehearse the presentation a few times. She offered subtle suggestions on how to organize ideas and how to use the drawings more effectively, but always allowing Clara to maintain her own personality in the presentation. When it was time for Agnes to leave, Clara was visibly sad. "Will you come back next Sunday?" Agnes looked at Mark, who felt his heart quicken slightly. "If your father doesn't mind." "Of course you can come back," Mark said quickly. "In fact, it would be great to have you here." Clara clapped her hands, already making plans for the next meeting. "I can show you my favorite storybook, and maybe we can do more experiments." After Clara went to say goodbye to Agnes with another tight hug, Mark walked her to the gate. "Agnes, thank you so much for today. And for everything you're doing for Clara. She's much more confident. You don't need to thank me, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here. You two brought something into my life that I didn't even know was missing. There was a vulnerability in her voice that touched Mark deeply. What do you mean? Agnes hesitated, as if revealing a secret. Lightness, simple joy, the feeling of being part of a family, even if just for a few hours. Mark felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't just gratitude for the help with Clara. It was something deeper, more complex. Agnes, he said softly, you'll always be welcome here. You've become important to both of us. Agnes smiled, and for the first time since they had met, Mark saw tears forming in her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, but something akin to relief or gratitude. Until Sunday, then, she said, lightly touching his arm before heading to her car. Mark stood at the gate watching her leave, feeling that something fundamental had changed that day. It wasn't just about Agnes opening up to them. He himself was opening up to the possibility that perhaps life could offer unexpected connections, people who appear when we least expect them and fill spaces we didn't even know existed. Sleep was slow to come, and when it finally did, Mark dreamed of unexpected conversations and connections he had never imagined possible. The science fair arrived the following Friday, and Clara woke up with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that was almost palpable. Mark prepared her favorite breakfast and kept repeating words of encouragement as she rehearsed her presentation one last time. "Remember what Miss Agnes said," Mark repeated as he helped Clara organize her materials in her backpack. "Imagine you're telling the story to someone you love very much." "I'm going to imagine I'm telling it to you and her," Clara replied, hugging her father. "You'll both be there, right?" "Of course, sweetie. I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world." At school, the gymnasium was transformed into an exhibition space, with small tables spread out where each child would present their project. Mark arrived a few minutes before Clara's presentation time and found Agnes arranging some chairs near the girls' table. "How is she doing?" Agnes asked, noticing Mark's worried expression. "Nervous but excited. I think she'll do well." Mark watched Clara talking animatedly with Peter, who was at the next table. "Agnes, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for her. She's different, more confident." Agnes smiled, lightly touching his arm. "She just needed someone who believed in her, and look how radiant she is today." When it was Clara's turn to present, she took a deep breath, looked at Mark and Agnes in the audience, and began to speak. Her voice, initially shy, gained strength as she explained the light experiments, showing her drawings and demonstrating how to create a small rainbow with a glass of water and a mirror. "White light is like a box of crayons," Clara said, using an analogy she had created herself. "It looks like just one color, but when you look closely, it has all the colors of the world inside it." Mark felt his eyes well up with pride, and when he looked at Agnes, he saw that she too was emotional. There was something deeply touching in seeing Clara overcoming her fears, speaking with clarity and passion about something she had learned to love. When Clara finished her presentation, she received an enthusiastic round of applause. She ran to hug Mark and Agnes, radiant with happiness and relief. "I did it. I did it, and I didn't forget anything." "You were brilliant, dear," Agnes said, hugging her tightly. "Best presentation I've ever seen." Later, after the projects were evaluated and the children were dismissed, Mark, Agnes, and Clara went to celebrate with ice cream at the parlor near the school. Clara couldn't stop talking about how proud she had felt, about the compliments she received from the judges, about how she wanted to do more science projects. "Miss Agnes," Clara said while licking her strawberry ice cream, "can you help me with the next project too?" "Of course, it would be a pleasure," Agnes replied, and Mark realized how naturally she had become part of their lives. That night, after putting Clara to bed, Mark called Agnes. There was something he wanted to say, a gratitude that went beyond simple words. "Agnes, I know I've thanked you several times, but I wanted you to know how important today was for Clara, for both of us." "Mark, you don't need to thank me. Seeing her happiness today was gift enough for me. There was a comfortable silence on the line, and then Mark heard himself saying, "How about we have dinner together tomorrow, just the two of us? Clara will be sleeping at her grandma's house." Agnes's pause was brief, but Mark could hear her breathing over the phone. Yes, I'd love to." On Saturday night, Mark got ready with a care he hadn't shown in a long time. He chose a blue shirt that Rose always said looked good on him, but then hesitated and changed into a green one. He didn't want the night to be a comparison to the past. He wanted it to be something new, something just for them. Agnes arrived promptly at 7, wearing a discreet red dress that accentuated her dark eyes. Mark had prepared a simple but careful dinner: grilled salmon, Sicilian lemon risotto, and a bottle of white wine he had saved for a special occasion. "You cook very well," Agnes said after the first bite. "Where did you learn?" "YouTube University," Mark laughed. After I was alone with Clara, I had to learn. In the beginning, we lived on instant noodles and frozen pizza. It was the first time he had mentioned Rose in Agnes's presence, and he noticed how the name came out naturally, without the usual weight of melancholy. Agnes seemed to notice too, but didn't show discomfort. "It must have been very difficult," she said gently, "taking care of a small child alone, dealing with everything." Mark nodded, taking a sip of wine. "It was. It still is, sometimes. There are moments when I feel completely lost, as if I don't know if I'm making the right choices for her. From what I see, you're doing a wonderful job. Clara is a happy, secure, loving girl. That doesn't happen by chance." The conversation flowed naturally between them, moving through various topics but always returning to the personal experiences that had shaped them. It was during dessert that Agnes shared something deeper. "Mark, can I tell you something? About why I became so closed off over the years?" He nodded, giving her his full attention. Agnes took a deep breath, as if preparing for a dive into deep waters. "I was married to a wonderful man named Lucas. We met in college, got married young, had plans for everything: a house, children, travel, a whole life together." Mark noticed the change in her voice, softer, more vulnerable. 5 years ago, he was in a car accident, a rainy night, another drunk driver. In a few seconds, the entire life we had planned disappeared." "Agnes!" Mark reached out to touch her hand across the table. "I'm so sorry." After that, I shut myself away, literally. I sold the house where we lived, moved to a small apartment, immersed myself in work. It was easier to be the rigid coordinator, the woman who doesn't get emotionally involved, than to deal with the possibility of feeling something and losing it again. Mark perfectly understood what she was describing. It's as if building an armor was the only way to survive. Exactly. And it worked for years. Until a message sent by mistake reminded me that there's life beyond survival. They looked at each other across the table, and Mark felt something moving between them, a subtle but undeniable electrical current. "Agnes, I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." Mark stood up slowly, extending his hand to her. Agnes accepted it and let herself be pulled to her feet, very close to him. For a moment they just looked at each other, recognizing in the other the same mixture of desire and fear, hope and vulnerability. When Mark finally kissed her, it was with a tenderness that surprised both of them. It wasn't a desperate or passionate kiss, but something deep, laden with all the unspoken words, with all the fears that were being overcome at that moment. When they separated, Agnes rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed. "Mark, I'm scared." "Me too," he admitted. "But maybe that's what's been missing for so long, feeling something worth the fear." They spent the rest of the night talking on the sofa. Agnes nestled against Mark's chest, sharing stories of their previous marriages, of the people they had lost, of the dreams they had had to bury. It was a different intimacy, built on mutual understanding of pain and the hope of starting anew. "Do you think Clara will accept it?" Agnes asked, tracing distracted circles on Mark's shirt. "I think she already has," Mark chuckled softly. Did you see how she hugs you? How she talks about you? To her, you're already part of the family. And for you? Mark kissed the top of her head. For me too. When Agnes left that night, it was with a promise that they would talk about what had happened between them, about what it meant for the future. Mark stood on the porch, watching her drive down the silent street, feeling a mix of contentment and apprehension. There was something precious and fragile blooming between them, something they both knew needed to be handled with delicacy. They had spent years protecting their hearts, and now they were choosing to open them again, with all the possibilities and risks that entailed. The following Sunday, when Agnes arrived for their traditional lunch, Clara immediately noticed something different in the way she and Mark looked at each other, as if there was an affectionate secret between them. "Are you dating?" Clara asked directly, in the middle of lunch, making them both almost choke on their food. Mark and Agnes exchanged glances, and it was Agnes who replied, "We're getting to know each other better, dear. How do you feel about that?" Clara thought for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "I think it's good. You make Daddy smile more, and I really like you." The simplicity of Clara's answer deeply touched both adults. For her, there were no complications or conflicts, just the honest observation that Agnes brought joy into their lives. That afternoon, after Clara went out to play in the garden, Mark and Agnes talked about how to proceed, about how to build something real and lasting without rushing the process. They knew they had something special, but they also knew they needed time to rebuild trust in love, in the possibility of a shared future. "We have time," Agnes said, intertwining her fingers with Mark's. "We don't need to rush." And for the first time in years, both felt they truly had time, that the future was no longer something scary and uncertain, but a possibility full of promises. The following weeks flowed like a dream for Mark. Agnes had become a constant presence in their lives, not just on Sundays, but also through calls during the week, goodnight messages for Clara, and occasional dinners when they managed to align their schedules. The house seemed more alive, more complete, filled with laughter and conversations Mark hadn't experienced in a long time. Clara had blossomed with Agnes's presence. Her grades improved, she started actively participating in classes again, and even made new friends at school. The girl had found in Agnes a female figure she trusted, someone she could talk to about things she sometimes felt shy discussing with her father. During a dinner at home, Agnes brought an unexpected gift, a golden retriever puppy rescued from a shelter, which she had decided to adopt. "This is Aaron," Agnes said, unleashing the golden puppy, who immediately ran to Clara. "I thought he could keep us company when I was here." Clara screamed with joy, kneeling on the floor to receive the puppy, who covered her with licks. "Can he sleep in my room when you come to visit?" "If your father allows it," Agnes smiled at Mark, who watched the scene with a heart tight with emotion. "Of course he can," Mark replied, but something within him trembled. Seeing Clara so happy, so naturally adapted to Agnes's presence, and now to the dog, brought a mixture of joy and discomfort that he couldn't explain. The following week, Mark received an invitation he had been postponing for months. Sunday lunch at Mrs. Fiona's house, Rose's mother and Clara's grandmother. It was a tradition they had kept irregularly after Rose's passing, but Mark always felt uncomfortable. During these visits, as if every object in his mother-in-law's house was a reminder of everything he had lost. "Agnes," Mark said hesitantly during one of their nightly phone calls, "my mother-in-law invited me for lunch on Sunday. Clara always goes, and I'd like you to come with me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mark, are you sure?" "I don't want to cause any embarrassment or—" "I'm sure," he said, though his voice didn't sound as convincing as he would have liked. "It's important to me that you meet Mrs. Fiona, and Clara would be happy to have you there." On Sunday, as they drove to her grandmother's house in the suburban area, Clara chattered animatedly in the back seat about all the toys she wanted to show Agnes. Mark drove in silence, his hands tense on the steering wheel, trying to ignore the knot growing in his stomach. Mrs. Fiona's house was exactly as Rose had left her teenage room, untouched, preserved like a sanctuary. There were photos of Rose at all stages of her life scattered on the furniture, and the perfume she used to wear still permeated the air. Mrs. Fiona greeted Agnes with polite cordiality, but Mark immediately noticed the coolness behind the greetings. The 60-year-old woman, always impeccably dressed, made a point of mentioning Rose in almost every sentence, as if wanting to constantly remind Agnes that she was occupying a place that belonged to someone else. Rose loved making this kind of salad, Mrs. Fiona said during lunch, serving a generous portion to Agnes. She had a special talent for seasonings. Mark always said no one cooked like her. Agnes accepted the comments with elegance, but Mark saw the tension growing in her shoulders. Clara, sensitive to the adults' mood changes, was quieter than usual, torn between the desire to include Agnes in conversations and her natural loyalty to her grandmother. "Grandma, can I show Miss Agnes pictures of Mommy when she was little?" Clara asked innocently. "Of course, dear. I'm sure Agnes would like to get to know our Rose better." Mark watched Agnes leafing through the photo album, smiling politely at the stories Mrs. Fiona told about Rose's childhood, about her dreams, about the plans she and Mark had made together. With each photo, each story, Mark felt as if a part of him was being pulled back to the past, to a life that no longer existed. "This one is from their wedding day," Mrs. Fiona said, pointing to a photo where Rose wore her own mother's wedding dress. Rose was so happy that day. She always said Mark was the love of her life. Agnes closed the album gently. She was very beautiful, and from what I see, very loved. "She was indeed," Mrs. Fiona replied, her gaze fixing on Mark with an intensity he knew well. "Some people are lucky enough to find true love once in a lifetime. Rose and Mark had that." The phrase echoed in Mark's mind throughout the drive back home. Agnes remained silent in the passenger seat, looking out the window while Clara had fallen asleep in the back seat. "Agnes, about today," Mark began. "You don't need to explain," she said softly. "I understand. Mrs. Fiona is still processing her grief, and it's natural for her to see any change as a threat to her daughter's memory." But Mark knew it was more than that. His mother-in-law's words had touched on insecurities he had been trying to ignore. Was he betraying Rose's memory? Was he being selfish by seeking happiness again? Was Clara truly okay with the situation, or just being polite? That night, after putting Clara to bed, Mark felt restless. He wandered through the house, observing details he hadn't noticed in a long time. The wedding photo on the living room shelf, the decorative objects Rose had chosen, her perfume he still kept on the nightstand. It was when he entered Clara's room to check on her that his life completely changed. The girl was sleeping soundly, but something was different on her nightstand. The photo that always stayed there, Rose holding baby Clara, had been discreetly put away in the drawer, partially hidden by other objects. Mark felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Clara had put away her mother's photo. Not thrown away, not broken in a moment of anger, just put away, as if she wanted to make space for other people in her life. A wave of panic swept over him. What if he was forcing a new family dynamic on Clara? What if the girl was feeling pressured to accept Agnes so as not to disappoint her father? What if she was burying her own memories of her mother to please the adults around her? Mark left Clara's room and locked himself in the bathroom, where he finally allowed the tears to come. It was a silent but devastating cry, laden with guilt, fear, and confusion. How could he be happy when Rose was no longer there? How could he build a new life when the previous one had been cut so abruptly? How could he expose Clara to the risk of losing someone important again? The hours dragged on until Mark finally picked up the phone and called Agnes. It was almost 2 a.m. "Mark, did something happen?" Her voice was alert, concerned. "Agnes, we need to talk, but I can't do it now, with Clara here. Can we meet tomorrow after school?" "Of course. Are you okay? Your voice sounds strange." Mark closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision he was about to make. "I'll be fine. I'll see you tomorrow." The next day, Mark asked Mrs. Fiona to pick up Clara from school. He found Agnes in the empty school parking lot, and she immediately noticed that something was deeply wrong. "Mark, what happened?" "Agnes, I can't continue with this." The words came out like a painful confession. "I thought I could. I thought I was ready, but I'm not. And I can't drag you and Clara into this emotional turmoil." Agnes paled. "What are you talking about? Did something happen yesterday at your mother-in-law's house?" "It's not about yesterday. It's about me. About the fact that I still love my wife. I still feel like I'm betraying her every time I'm happy with you. And Clara—" His voice broke. Clara put her mother's photo in the drawer, as if she was making space for you, and that terrifies me. Mark, children deal with emotions differently from adults. Putting away the photo doesn't mean she's forgetting her mother. It might mean she feels safe enough to— "No," Mark interrupted her. "I can't risk my daughter's emotional well-being because I'm confused about my own feelings. And it's not fair to you to continue something when I don't know if I'll ever be able to love you completely, without guilt." Agnes was silent for a long moment, processing the words. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, but Mark could hear the pain beneath the calm. "I understand," she finally said. "And maybe you're right. Maybe I got involved too quickly. Maybe I confused gratitude with something deeper." "Agnes, it's not that. Mark, it's okay. We were both trying to heal old wounds, and maybe we mistook that for true love." She turned to leave, but stopped. "I only ask one thing. Don't let Clara think it was her fault, or that she did something wrong. She doesn't deserve to carry the weight of our uncertainties." Mark watched Agnes walk away, feeling as if an essential part of himself was being torn out. But at the same time, there was a disturbing relief in the decision. It was easier to return to the security of known pain than to risk the vulnerability of something new. In the weeks that followed, the school became an emotional minefield. Agnes returned to her rigid professional demeanor, greeting Mark only when necessary and avoiding any personal interaction. Mark immersed himself in work, volunteering for extra activities and avoiding the hallways where he knew he might encounter her. Clara was the first to notice the change. "Daddy, why doesn't Miss Agnes come for lunch at home anymore? Is she mad at me?" "No, sweetie, she's just busy with work. It has nothing to do with you." But Clara was too smart to accept the explanation. She started asking questions at school, looking for Agnes in the hallways, asking when she could see her again. Teachers reported that the girl was more distracted in classes, less participative, and had returned to showing anxiety in group activities. Agnes, in turn, was going through the worst weeks since Lucas's loss. She had allowed her defenses to drop, had allowed herself to dream of a family again, had opened herself to loving a child who was not biologically hers. And now the silence of the empty house echoed with a loneliness that felt even deeper for having briefly tasted the alternative. At night, she found herself looking at her phone, almost calling Mark or sending messages to Clara. Aaron, the golden retriever puppy, seemed to sense her sadness, staying closer to her, as if he could offer some canine comfort for the pain his owner was feeling. It was as if the last few months had been a dream from which everyone had abruptly woken, returning to the cold reality of their previous lives. But now that reality seemed even emptier by contrast, as if they had tasted something sweet, only to have it taken away before they could fully satisfy themselves. 3 weeks had passed since Mark ended the relationship with Agnes, and the silent tension hanging over the school was almost palpable. The other teachers noticed the exaggerated formality between them, but no one dared to comment. Mark obsessively focused on his physical education classes, while Agnes immersed herself in pedagogical reports and administrative meetings. Clara, however, couldn't hide the impact of the situation. Her teachers reported that she was more introspective, less participative, and had lost the sparkle in her eyes that had so characterized her recent months. Mark tried to compensate with extra activities, special outings, and increased attention, but he knew that something fundamental was missing in his daughter's life. It was during a school play that everything changed. Clara had been chosen to be the narrator of a play about the seasons, a role she had enthusiastically rehearsed in the previous weeks. Mark arrived at the auditorium promptly, finding a seat in the 3rd row, proud to see his daughter on stage. When the curtains opened, Clara was positioned center stage, dressed in a yellow dress that represented the sun. She began to speak with a clear voice, telling the story of how the seasons alternated to bring balance to the world. Everything was going perfectly until the moment she needed to talk about winter, the season of dormancy and renewal. "And then comes winter," Clara began, but her voice trembled. When the things we love, when they—" Mark saw his daughter freezing on stage, her eyes filling with tears, the words refusing to come out. The audience began to murmur, and he was ready to go up on stage when he saw a familiar figure moving along the sides of the auditorium. Agnes had risen from her seat in the back row and walked discreetly to a position where Clara could see her. When their eyes met, Agnes smiled warmly and made a subtle gesture, placing her hand over her heart and pointing to Clara. It was a silent language they had developed during their months together. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on Agnes, and found her voice again. "And then comes winter, when nature rests so that new flowers can bloom in spring. Because sometimes you have to let go for even more beautiful things to grow." The words came out with a strength and meaning that transcended the original script. Mark felt a lump in his throat, realizing that his daughter was talking about much more than seasons. She was talking about loss, about renewal, about the ability to honor what was lost while opening up to what could come. When the presentation ended, Clara ran off the stage and went directly to Agnes, who received her with a tight hug. "You were wonderful, dear. When you got lost, you found the strength to continue. That's very brave." Mark watched the scene a few meters away, feeling as if all his certainties of the last few days were being questioned. There was something profoundly wrong in keeping Clara and Agnes apart when it was obvious how much they needed each other. "Miss Agnes," Clara said, still hugging her, "you disappeared. I missed you. Daddy missed you too, even if he doesn't want to talk about it." Agnes looked over Clara's head and met Mark's eyes. For a moment, all the pain and confusion of the past few weeks passed between them in silence. Then Agnes knelt down to be at Clara's height. "Sometimes adults get confused about their feelings, dear, but that doesn't mean we don't like you. It just means we need time to understand some things." That night, after putting Clara to bed, Mark sat on the porch reflecting on what he had witnessed. The way Agnes had instinctively supported his daughter in her moment of need without thinking about her own hurts. The way Clara had shone simply by knowing Agnes was there, rooting for her. It was then that the phone rang. On the other end of the line was Mrs. Fiona. "Mark, can you come here? I need to talk to you about some things." His mother-in-law's tone was different, less formal, more urgent. Mark hesitated, but something in her voice made him accept. He called their neighbor Anne to stay with Clara and drove to Mrs. Fiona's house. She greeted him at the door with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Sit down, Mark. We have a lot to talk about." The living room was exactly as always, with Rose's photos everywhere. But this time Mark didn't feel the usual tightness in his chest. Instead, the images seemed softer, less accusatory. "Mark," Mrs. Fiona began, serving tea in delicate cups, "I need to apologize for my behavior last Sunday. It wasn't fair to you or to Agnes." Mark almost dropped his cup. It was the last thing he expected to hear. "Mrs. Fiona, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," she interrupted him firmly, "because I've been selfish trying to keep Rose alive through your loneliness, and that's not fair to anyone, especially Clara." Mark remained silent, processing her words. "Mark, I always knew that one day you would love again. Rose knew it too. In fact, in the last weeks before the accident, she even mentioned it to me. She said that if something happened to her, she hoped you would find someone special to share your life with and help take care of Clara." The words hit Mark like a lightning bolt. "She said that?" "She did. And you know what else she said? That she hoped it would be someone who loved Clara as if she were her own daughter, someone who wouldn't try to replace her, but who would bring their own form of love into your lives." Mark felt his eyes filling with tears. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" Mrs. Fiona sighed deeply. "Because I wasn't ready to let Rose go. I thought that by keeping you alone, I would somehow be keeping her alive. But this week, seeing Clara sad, realizing she had lost the light in her eyes, I understood what I had been doing." She stood up and went to a bookshelf, taking out a letter yellowed by time. "Rose wrote this for you. She asked me to give it to you when I thought you were ready to move on. I should have Given it to you a long time ago." Mark took the letter with trembling hands. Rose's handwriting was there, delicate and familiar, as if she were in the room with them. "My love," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means it's time for you to open your heart again. I know what you're like, I know you'll feel guilty, you'll think you're betraying me somehow. But Mark, the greatest gift you can give me is to be happy again. Take care of our Clara, but allow her to have a female figure in her life. She will need that. And you, my dear, deserve to love and be loved again, not as a substitute for what we had, but as something new and unique. When you find that person, can you do me a favor? Love her without guilt, take care of her as you took care of me, and allow her to love our daughter. It will be the greatest gift you can give to the 3 women in your life, the one who was, the one who is, and the one who is yet to come, with all my love and my blessing for your happiness, Rose." Mark finished reading the letter with tears streaming freely down his face. Mrs. Fiona approached and placed a caring hand on his shoulder. "Agnes is a special woman, Mark. I saw how she looks at Clara, how Clara blossoms in her presence, and I saw how you smile when you think no one is looking. Don't let fear steal your chance to be a family." That night, Mark drove to Agnes's apartment. It was almost 10 o'clock, but he knew he needed to talk to her immediately. He knocked on the door with a pounding heart, holding Rose's letter in his hands. Agnes opened the door, surprised, wearing simple pajamas with Aaron running around her legs. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "Mark? What are you doing here?" "Agnes, I made the biggest mistake of my life. May I come in?" She hesitated for a moment, but opened the door. They sat on the small living room sofa, Aaron settling between them as if to facilitate the conversation. "Agnes, I need to tell you some things. About Rose, about my fears, about what really happened." Mark told her about the letter, about the conversation with Mrs. Fiona, about how he had let fear govern his decisions. Agnes listened in silence, occasionally wiping away a stray tear. "I was so scared of betraying her memory that I didn't realize I was betraying her future," Mark said. "Rose wanted me to be happy. She wanted Clara to have a complete family, and I almost threw that away because of guilt." "Mark," Agnes said softly, "I understand your fears. I have the same ones. Every time I allow myself to be happy with you, I feel like I'm being unfaithful to Lucas's memory, but maybe the real infidelity is refusing to live completely." Mark took her hands. "Agnes, I love you. I love how you take care of Clara, how you brought light back into our lives, how you reminded me that it's possible to be happy without forgetting those we've lost. Will you accept trying again?" Agnes smiled through her tears. "Mark, I never stopped trying. Even when you pulled away, I continued to love both of you. The question is, are you truly ready to build something new, respecting what came before?" Mark kissed her hands. "I am ready." And Rose blessed this. "She wanted me to find you." They spent hours talking, planning how to rebuild what they had almost lost. This time it would be different. It would be conscious, intentional, based on the understanding that loving again was not a betrayal of the past, but a celebration of the human capacity to renew itself. When Mark finally left, it was already past midnight, but both knew they had found something worth all the fear, all the uncertainty. They had found a way to honor the past while building the future. 6 months after the reconciliation, Mark's house had completely transformed. Agnes had gradually moved in, bringing her books, her plants, and her warm presence that filled all the empty corners that had existed for so long. What began as extended weekend visits naturally evolved into a definitive move that happened as organically as breathing. Clara had insisted on helping Agnes set up her office in what was previously an unused guest room. The girl, now 8 years old and much more confident, had become the official decorator of the new space, choosing wall colors and furniture placement with the seriousness of a professional. "Miss Agnes, do you think the desk looks better here near the window or on the other side?" Clara asked, moving a small chair to test different positions. Agnes smiled, observing the girl's dedication to creating a perfect space. "I think near the window is ideal. That way I can look out at the garden when I'm working from home." "And you can see Daddy and me playing outside," Clara added, clapping her hands at her own idea. Aaron, the golden retriever who had grown considerably in recent months, was sprawled on the office floor, supervising the work with the characteristic laziness of a happy and well-cared-for dog. Clara had developed a special relationship with him, and Aaron had become her shadow during playtime in the garden. "Daddy," Clara said during dinner that night, "now that Miss Agnes really lives here and Aaron always has company, do you think we can get another dog?" Mark almost choked on his water. "Another dog? Clara, Aaron is already enough work." "But he's alone when we all go to work and school," she argued with the impeccable logic of a child. "And Mrs. Fiona said 2 dogs keep each other company." Agnes and Mark exchanged glances across the table. Mrs. Fiona had become an enthusiastic ally of the relationship, visiting regularly and offering advice on everything from gardening to dog training. "Let's think about it, sweetie," Agnes said diplomatically. "Maybe we can talk to the vet to see if Aaron would like a companion." Agnes's integration into the family had been surprisingly natural. She had found a perfect balance between being a maternal figure for Clara without trying to replace Rose. Photos of Clara's mother continued to be scattered throughout the house, but now they shared space with new memories being created every day. At night, when Clara went to bed, she insisted on saying goodnight to her mother's photo before hugging Agnes. "Good night, Mommy Rose. Good night, Mommy Agnes," had become her routine, a sweet and natural way to honor both the past and the present. Mark observed these interactions with a mixture of joy and admiration. Clara had found her own way to navigate between the two realities, creating an expanded family where everyone had a place. Agnes, in turn, had embraced this unique role with a grace that deeply touched his heart. It was during a special weekend that Mark decided it was time to formalize what they already lived every day. He had planned carefully with Clara's enthusiastic help and Mrs. Fiona's complicity. "Agnes," he said on Saturday morning, "how about we take a walk in the park? It's been a while since we went there." It was the same park where they had spent many mornings during the first months of their relationship, where Clara ran with Aaron while they talked about life, about dreams, about the future they were building together. "Of course," Agnes replied, noticing something different in Mark's voice but without being able to identify exactly what. "Clara, are you coming with us?" "I'll come later," Clara said quickly, exchanging a knowing look with her father. "I want to finish my drawing first." In the park, they walked along the familiar trails, talking about plans for school holidays, about the new science project Clara was developing, about small renovations they wanted to do to the house. It was an everyday conversation, full of the shared concerns and joys of a family. It was when they reached the bench where they used to sit to observe the lake that Mark suddenly stopped. "Agnes, there's something I want to tell you." She turned to him, noticing the change in his expression, the solemnity that had taken over his features. "In these months that you've been living with us," Mark began, "I've realized that I can no longer imagine my life, our life, without you. You haven't just become part of our family. You've transformed it into something more complete and happier than I ever imagined possible." Agnes felt her heart quicken, suspecting what was coming, but almost not daring to believe it. "You brought joy back into our home, security to Clara and to me. To me, you brought the possibility of loving again without guilt, of building a future that honors the past without being limited by it." Mark knelt on the park ground, taking a small box from his pocket. "Agnes Miller, will you marry me? Not to replace anything that came before, but to create something new and unique that is ours." Agnes brought her hands to her face, tears streaming freely. "Mark, yes, of course, yes." It was then that they heard clapping and shouts coming from behind the trees. Clara appeared running, followed by Mrs. Fiona, Anne, the neighbor, and some of the school teachers. Aaron ran alongside Clara, barking animatedly, as if he understood the importance of the moment. "I helped choose the ring," Clara shouted, jumping to hug both of them. "And Grandma Fiona said she can make the wedding cake." Agnes hugged Clara tightly, still in shock from the surprise. "You organized all of this?" "It was Clara's idea," Mrs. Fiona said, approaching with a radiant smile. She said a new family deserved a celebration with the entire extended family. The wedding took place 3 months later, in a small and intimate ceremony in the garden of the house that now belonged to the three of them. Agnes wore a simple sky-blue dress that Clara had helped choose, while Mark was elegant in a grey suit that Rose would have approved of. Clara was the flower girl, scattering white rose petals with the seriousness of someone who took her responsibility very seriously. Aaron wore a golden bow tie and behaved exemplarily throughout the ceremony, except for a moment when he tried to eat some of the petals that fell on the ground. During the vows, Agnes said, "Mark and Clara, you have taught me that love doesn't have to be a replacement but can be an addition. I promise to love you not by trying to be someone I'm not, but by being the best version of myself alongside you." Mark, his voice choked with emotion, replied, "Agnes, you came into our lives through a message sent by mistake, but perhaps it wasn't a mistake. Perhaps it was the universe reminding us that sometimes the most important things arrive when we least expect them. I promise to build with you a family where the past is honored and the future is celebrated." Mrs. Fiona cried throughout the ceremony, but they were tears of joy. Later, during the small reception in the garden, she approached Agnes. "My dear," she said, holding her new daughter-in-law's hands, "Rose would be very happy today. She always wanted Mark to find someone who loved Clara as much as you do." "I love this whole family," Agnes replied, looking around at Mark playing with Clara and Aaron in the garden, at the guests laughing and talking, at the life they had built together. "Including you, Mrs. Fiona?" The older woman smiled, finally at peace with the changes she had resisted for so long. "And I love you too, my daughter." On the anniversary of the accidental text a year after the wedding, Mark took Agnes back to the bench in the park where he had proposed. Clara was at school, and they were enjoying a rare afternoon alone. "Have you ever thought about what our lives would be like if I hadn't sent that message by mistake?" Mark asked, hugging Agnes as they watched the lake. "I think about it sometimes," Agnes admitted. "But you know what I think? It wasn't a mistake. It was the heart, speaking louder than reason, sending exactly the right message to the right person." Mark kissed her forehead affectionately. "You're right. Sometimes the best things in life arrive disguised as mistakes." That night at home, as Clara showed Agnes the drawing she had made at school, Mark observed his family and felt profound gratitude. They had built something unique, a family that honored the past without being its prisoner, that celebrated the present without fear of the future, that understood that true love doesn't replace, but multiplies. Aaron was sleeping at the foot of the armchair, where Agnes read a story to Clara. The second dog they had adopted, a small mixed breed named Victor, was curled up on the girl's lap. The house was full of life, of laughter, of love that renewed itself every day. And that night, when everyone went to sleep, Clara said her customary prayer. "Good night, Mommy Rose. Thank you for sending Mommy Agnes to us. Good night, Mommy Agnes. Thank you for staying. Good night, Daddy. Thank you for being brave." Mark and Agnes looked at each other over Clara's head, knowing they had found something rare and precious, a second chance at love that honored everything that came before while building something completely new. Life had taught them that sometimes the most important messages arrive by accident. Or perhaps, as Agnes had said, it's no accident at all. Perhaps it's the heart finding its way back home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Mark, Agnes and Clara has touched your hearts. This beautiful narrative about second chances and families that form in unexpected ways reminds us that true love knows no limits of time or circumstances. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on the suggested video. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the beauty of human relationships. Don't miss our next content and tell us in the comments which part of the story moved you the most. We await you in the next story.